I didn't interrupt him when he said he wanted freedom. I didn't ask whose heart he was following, even though I already knew. I didn't remind him that just 2 weeks earlier he'd held my hand at my father's funeral and whispered that we'd face everything together. I just sat there, listening to the spoon tap the side of his mug, thinking about how strange it was that betrayal could sound so polite. "If that's what you want," I said finally, "then we should do this cleanly." His shoulders relaxed immediately, like a man who'd been holding his breath for months. "I don't want this to get ugly," he said. "We can keep lawyers out of it, split things fairly." Fairly. That word meant something very different to him than it did to me. "We don't have much together anyway," he continued quickly. "The house is technically in your father's trust. The companies were never mine. I'll take my car, my personal account, and we'll go our separate ways." He was offering generosity with things he never owned. I nodded again, quietly filing everything away. "All right," I said finally. "I'll have my lawyer draft something." For a split second, panic flashed across his face. "Your lawyer?" he asked. "I thought we agreed—" "I need to protect myself," I said gently. "You understand that, don't you?" He forced a smile. "Of course, I just don't want this to turn into a battle." Neither did I. I wanted it to turn into a lesson. That night, Ethan didn't sleep in our bed. He packed a bag and said he'd stay with Lena for a few days to give us space. I watched him walk out of the house we'd shared for over a decade without a single tear falling. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because something colder had already taken its place. The next morning, my phone started buzzing before I'd even finished my coffee. Messages from distant relatives, old family friends, people who hadn't spoken to me in years. Everyone suddenly wanted to check in. Everyone suddenly had advice. But the message that mattered came just after noon. It was from an unknown number. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. You deserve better." Attached was a photo. Ethan, Maya, her hand on his chest, his mouth against her temple, taken weeks ago. I stared at the image for a long time, not because it shocked me, but because it confirmed what I already knew. He hadn't waited until the inheritance to fall out of love. He'd waited until the inheritance to make his exit profitable. What he didn't know was that I'd already made mine. The private investigator my father's attorney recommended was efficient and discreet. Within days, I had a full picture of Ethan's double life. The hotel stays charged to a card he thought I couldn't see, the gifts, the apartment he'd helped Maya rent under Lena's name, the conversations where he joked about how Amara would be too busy playing CEO to notice. One message stood out. "Once the divorce is final, we're free. She won't fight it. She never does." I read that sentence over and over. He was right about one thing. I wasn't going to fight. I was going to close the door and lock it. When Ethan came back to collect the rest of his things, he was unusually cheerful. He talked about the future like it was something shiny and uncomplicated. He said he was thinking of traveling, of finding himself, of starting something new. "I'm proud of you," he said at one point. "Most people would be bitter." I smiled. "You taught me well." He laughed, thinking it was a compliment. The divorce papers were signed faster than he expected. I didn't contest. I didn't demand spousal support. I let him walk away clean. Too clean. What he didn't notice was the clause he skimmed past, the one that ensured he had no future claims, no indirect benefits, no access to any entity connected to my family's holdings. What he didn't realize was that the quiet settlement also included confidentiality agreements that would cost him more than he could afford if he ever broke them. By the time the divorce was finalized, Ethan was already engaged. I found out the same way I found out about the affair. A message, a photo, a ring. "Thought you should know," the sender wrote. "They're moving fast." They always do when they think they've won. The invitation arrived a month later. Cream-colored envelope, gold lettering, his name and hers printed like a declaration. You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Ethan Moore and Maya Collins. I laughed out loud. He had the nerve to invite me, not because I didn't hear about the divorce from Ethan directly. I heard it the same way I heard about everything else in his life after I cut him off, through whispers, forwarded messages, and people who suddenly remembered my number when drama needed an audience. Maya left him, one message said. Apparently, she says he lied about money, another added. He's telling people you destroyed his life. I closed the messages and set my phone face down on the table. For the first time in years, none of it felt heavy. When you spend enough time being underestimated, there comes a moment when silence becomes power. I didn't correct the rumors. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even acknowledge them. I was too busy building something that didn't need his name attached to it. The new office overlooked the harbor. Floor-to-ceiling glass, steel beams, quiet confidence, no excess, no show, just control. I remember standing there alone one evening, watching the sun disappear behind the cranes and tankers, and realizing I'd never once imagined this version of my life while I was married. Not because I lacked ambition, because I lacked space. Ethan started emailing me when he realized calls wouldn't go through. Long messages, emotional ones. He apologized in paragraphs, then followed it with blame in the same breath. He said he'd been confused, overwhelmed, that he'd made mistakes. Mistakes are forgetting anniversaries. What he did was strategy. One email stood out. I just want to talk. We owe each other that after everything. We didn't owe each other anything. I never replied. That silence drove him harder than anger ever could. He showed up at my office unannounced one afternoon, standing at reception like a man who still believed familiarity was a currency. The assistant called me to ask if I wanted to see him. No, I said. Tell him I'm in a meeting. I can hear you, Ethan shouted from the lobby. I smiled to myself. Then he already has his answer, I said, and hung up. Security escorted him out. That night, Lena tried her luck. She sent a voice note instead of a text, maybe thinking it would sound more sincere. You didn't have to ruin him. He loved you in his own way. I listened once, then deleted it. Love that needs control isn't love, and loyalty that only survives comfort isn't loyalty at all. A year passed, then 2. My life filled up in ways it never had before. Boardrooms replaced excuses, decisions replaced doubts. I traveled for work and pleasure, sometimes alone, sometimes with people who respected boundaries instead of pushing against them. I learned that peace isn't boring when you've lived in chaos long enough. One evening, after a conference overseas, I checked into my hotel and found a message waiting at the desk. Mr. Moore called earlier. He asked if you were staying here. I felt something then. Not fear, not anger, just mild annoyance. Even now, he was still searching for proximity. I asked the concierge not to pass along any information and went upstairs. From my window, the city stretched endlessly, full of strangers who had no idea who I was or what I'd survived. It was perfect. Months later, I ran into him by accident. A charity gala, different city, same circles. He looked smaller, not physically, though he'd lost weight, but in the way men do when the illusion they relied on collapses. His suit was expensive but ill-fitting, like he was trying to wear a version of himself that no longer existed. He noticed me across the room and froze. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then he walked over. You look... He stopped himself, searching for a word that wouldn't reveal too much. Successful. I am, I said simply. He nodded, eyes darting around as if waiting for someone to intervene. I just wanted to say, he began, I never meant for things to turn out like they did. That's rarely how consequences work, I replied. He swallowed. I lost everything. No, I corrected. You lost access. That one landed. There was a pause, thick and uncomfortable. I loved you, he said quietly. I met his eyes. You loved the version of me that made you feel safe. I thought that would be the end of it. Closure wrapped neatly in distance and indifference. Life rarely offers that kind of mercy twice. About 3 months after the gala, my assistant mentioned his name casually, like it meant nothing. There was a call this morning, she said, scrolling through her tablet. Someone asking if you'd be willing to reconsider a partnership, Ethan Moore. I didn't react right away. I finished signing the document in front of me, capped the pen, and set it down carefully. A partnership? I asked. Yes, she said. He's representing a startup, or trying to. I almost smiled. Decline, I said, and make sure it doesn't come back to my desk. She nodded and left without another word. But the fact that he was trying again, circling, testing boundaries, told me something important. He wasn't done. A week later, I received a handwritten letter, actual paper, ink, careful handwriting. It was waiting for me at home, placed on the entry table like it belonged there. Amara, I know you don't owe me anything. I know I forfeited the right to ask, but I'm asking anyway. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a conversation, one honest conversation. You were right about everything. I see that now. I didn't then. Please, E. I folded the letter once and placed it in a drawer with documents I never intended to revisit. Not because it tempted me, because it didn't. That was how I knew I'd finally moved on. The irony was that the more I pulled away, the more his life seemed to unravel. Without access, without leverage, without the reflected authority of my name, he struggled to be taken seriously. Deals fell apart, promises went unkept. People he once impressed realized there was nothing behind the performance. Maya wasn't the only one who'd left him. Lena moved out shortly after, blaming him for choosing wrong. She'd found someone else to attach herself to, someone with momentum. Ethan had none. Meanwhile, my world expanded quietly. I bought a home by the water. Not a mansion, not a statement, just something that felt like mine. I hosted dinners with people who didn't ask what I could do for them. I slept without anxiety. I woke without dread. One evening, as I watched the tide roll in, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Amara, Ethan said when I answered. His voice was thinner than I remembered. Please don't hang up. I stayed silent. I'm not calling to ask for help. I just need to tell you something. You deserve to know. You already told me everything when you left, I said. No, this is different. I closed my eyes, already regretting answering. What, I asked, could possibly be different? He hesitated. Didn't just plan to leave you, he admitted. I planned to take something with me. The air changed. What do you mean? I asked. There were documents, information. I thought I could use it later. Insurance. I felt no panic, just confirmation. And, I said, and I never did, I swear. I didn't sell anything, I didn't share anything, but I still have them. You had them, I corrected. Yes, had. I destroyed everything. I couldn't live with it. I believed him, not because he'd earned trust, but because guilt had finally found him. You're telling me this now because you want absolution, I said. Yes, he whispered. I can't give you that, I replied, but I appreciate the honesty. Is that it? After everything, that's all? That's all, I said. I hung up before he could say goodbye. Some people mistake access for importance. They think being able to reach you means they still matter. It doesn't. Months later, I read an article about him by accident, a small one buried near the bottom of a business page. Former executive faces bankruptcy after failed ventures. No photo, no interview, just facts. I closed the browser. That night, I slept deeply. Years passed. I fell in love again, not dramatic. Years later, I stood on the balcony of my office watching the sun set over the city, golden light spilling across the skyline. The empire my father built was no longer just a legacy, it was my own. Every decision, every risk, every quiet move I had made after that day at the breakfast table had brought me here, stronger, wiser, untouchable. Ethan and everyone he dragged into his schemes were nothing more than memories now, shadows of a life I had outgrown. I didn't feel bitterness. I didn't feel triumph. I felt peace, the kind that comes when you finally realize you are the only person responsible for your happiness and no one else ever will be. That evening, I left the office early. I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need to prove anything. I walked through the city streets, past lights and laughter and ordinary lives, and smiled quietly to myself. I had everything I wanted, not because I had taken it from anyone, but because I had never let anyone take me from myself. And for the first time in my life, I was free. Not in the way Ethan had imagined freedom, not in the way anyone had imagined it for me, but in the only way that truly mattered. Free, powerful, unshakable, and completely, unapologetically me. The past was behind me. The future stretched out endlessly, bright and untouchable. And I stepped forward into it, finally unafraid.